And I will share the screen. Should be visible.
I think it looks good.
Good, thank you. So we read 3 and 4 last time. If there are any other thoughts about those, we could certainly start there or go ahead with question 5. Can I ask someone to read 5?
I would read it.
Thank you, John.
Question 5. How doth this work? How doth this word work in or upon the heart? Answer. According to the entrance it gets into the heart, or according as it is rejected or refused. As it gets entrance, it works life there, and works the creature into its life. It brings in its nature, its righteousness, its holiness, its sweetness, its peace, its love, its joy, its meekness, its patience, etc., as it makes room in the heart by working out the contrary. But where it is rejected, it works death and condemnation, and increaseth the captivity and misery of the soul, so that it were better never to hear any sound of Christ in the heart than not to hearken and become subject thereto.
The sentence or the phrase that stands out for me is as it makes room in the heart by working out the contrary. And what that suggests to me is that the power of this word is stronger than what has been in the heart previously, because it works out the contrary, it says. So that indicates that it has greater power than that which is contrary to it. One other thought in the sentence that follows. Well, actually 2, but where it is rejected, it works death and condemnation, meaning that there has to be some act of rejection on the part of the heart for this death and condemnation to take hold. And then it goes on, and increaseth the captivity and misery of the soul, so that it were better never to hear any sound of Christ in the heart than not to hearken and become subject thereto. And that last part made me think maybe that, or it's likely that that's the cause that prophets are often rejected or killed, because they do sound that word, make it heard. And that if it's rejected, if that word is rejected, the captivity and misery of the soul increases. So that those who do not want to hear the word find themselves worse off, in greater misery of soul than they were before they heard the prophet speak that word. So it explains why the prophets in history have been persecuted, as were the early friends.
This reminds me, I agree with that. And it makes me think of what Jesus said of Judas Iscariot. It were better that that man had a millstone hung around his neck and he cast into the sea, or that he had never been born. I listened to the recording of the last session earlier today and found myself thrown into deep sorrow, feeling, I've heard the voice of Christ. I've seen his appearance in my mind's eye. I've gotten messages from him, and it's been so long since that's happened. What have I done to drive him away? And I couldn't find anything. And I said, well, I guess that's just my depression talking. I certainly hope he will explain to me at some point why he's testing me like this. And just now it occurred to me, I'm laboring with my son who's mentally ill, and whom I've entreated, because he's a nursing professional, to banish evil speech from his mouth and evil and hateful thoughts from his mind. But I'm thinking of him as someone who is periodically, I hope not all the time, but some of the time, rejecting good counsel. By his own report, he heard from the Lord directly when he was 10, saying that all his sins would be forgiven. But I think he's fleeing from the word in his heart. And maybe because of some deep and unacknowledged anger, maybe at his mother for having asked for a separation, maybe at me for having agreed to a separation back when he was turning 13, which is now 23 years ago. But still, it's an abiding bitterness. And This reminds me in turn of George Fox writing that he was made to feel the nature of Cain and Judas and all the Balaam and all the bad guys of the Bible, so that he would have a sense of all people's conditions. That's my only explanation for this sorrow and feeling of abandonment that I'm passing through, that makes sense to me. I am praying for him, but it's also being in this state is making me feel what it's like to have had living contact with the living Christ and to have witnessed miracles and auditions and visions, and then feel like it's all gone. I can't make it happen. I shouldn't try to make it happen. All I can do is wait. That was a longer speech than I had been planning to make, and thank you all for your indulgence, but I thought it's relevant to this topic.
The word, in my experience, for me, that's been helpful in this context is having a receptive heart that receives. I think I first latched onto that from the verse early in John's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 12, where John says, those who received him, or received the word, those, often the old text called received him, but in the inclusive Bible it says those who received the word. Jesus is the word. To them was given the power and life to become children of God. And so the way this word gets entrance is by being received. It is never violent. It's always gently just tapping on the door. And the reception of it is often a simple self-denial where we have a negative or a corrupting thought, and we say, which is dear to us, to our own sense of victimhood or ego. And this little word knocks on the door, and we can either say no and shut the door, or we can open the heart and receive it in, and we just have to deny our own thought. To me, that's the first level of self-denial, is actually admitting the word into the heart. And once that happens, normally the corrupting thought just disappears. Or as Fox put it, I think in his epistle 10, is hushed and flies away. But our little task is actually to have a receptive heart. And it makes room in the heart by working out the contrary, which is true. The heart becomes more receptive and there's more space in it. But I also, my own experience is it also enlarges the heart somewhat. And this trouble. Know this advice of just act not, but wait till light arises is helpful. My own sense also is that as sanctification starts to take place, sanctification, the sanctifying work of Christ within us actually softens the heart, makes it less hard. Less determined to have its own way, softens and makes it supple and receptive.
I feel like I can rest in that sentence that starts, it brings in its nature. It's and it ends or just before that, it works the creature into its life. There's that sense of gentle kneading of dough that has yeast in it, that has life in it, and has that expansive quality. And what it brings isn't thunderbolts and lightning and booming voices. It just brings in these very gentle, kind motions.
I keep getting a few images from this. The first line brought to mind the passage, I stand at the door and knock. And as we answer that door, it really takes courage to open the door, and how wide we're going to open the door, because we don't know what it's going to ask of us. And so if we are rooted in fear, well, we're not going to open the door at all, or we're not going to open it very wide because we're afraid of what's going to maybe challenge us to do. And so that in turn brought to mind the end of Psalm 27, that says, wait for the Lord with courage, be stout-hearted, wait for the Lord. And I think that's the courage that we're being called to open that door, so that, and open it wide, so that as much of that light fills us and expands our hearts.
Both of the comments by Madeline, and is that Lisa on the right and Jan to the left? I also don't see it as a thunderbolt. It's it's a slowly opening of the door. At least it is for me. So my question is, maybe I don't know if it's a question or a comment. I find myself, when I'm getting afraid of what's next that God may ask me to do I slowly close the door a bit? It's not a linear growth, the old statement of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. At least I think that's been my path so far. I'd like to think it's 3 steps forward and a half step back. Maybe that's more accurate, but because as David said, this enlargement of the heart that doesn't happen overnight. It takes time for us to rid ourselves of the things that are contrary to God. And I love this question and this answer because it's just that. It's time. It's a continual growth, but it's not a linear growth, at least not for me.
I was also drawn to the sentence that Madeline had pointed out. And also, you know, sort of to echo what a lot of folks have shared. The you know, the response to that word, the acceptance of the word working in, you know, it's the first step is to agree, you know, to be present in and around as God works in and around us and through us and does all the things, you know, offers all the gifts that you know, we can either pick up, ignore, run from, or, you know, calmly collect and see what to do with. That sentence I found, you know, at first glance, it's like, well, this is a nice little litany, but it really, there's a cadence to it. And I think that reflects the gentleness that's been mentioned and the, you know, the ease of the approach. That's not something that's screaming in nature and, you know, demanding and pounding and, you know, I think sometimes when there's that sense of things, that's more the resistance, or old things unresolved. But, you know, it's just righteousness, it's holiness, it's sweetness, it's peace, it's love, it's joy, it's meekness, it's patience, and even etc. You know, that hits the notes. It's just, yeah, it's just, the language is beautiful because the message within it is beautiful and carries, you know, I mean, that's kind of what ministry does. That's the word becomes the language becomes the ministry and the action. And you know, in all of that, growth occurs, life occurs, birth occurs. So anyway, I'm very, very grateful to be here tonight and to listen to everyone share. So thank you all for that.
Please excuse my hoarseness. I'm getting over COVID here. I'm toying with a half-baked thought of if one of the indirect ways that my heart could effectively reject the word would be to place some expectations, assumptions or expectations on that word working in my heart. If I approached it with the expectation, well, oh, if the word is entering my heart, then I will feel feel inspired in a way that I was when I felt on a spiritual high long ago, or I will feel elevated to some using gifts of ministry and that I hear others use. I'm just wondering if expectations can be an insidious kind of block, effectively rejecting the word. Something I need to be on guard about. It's easy to have expectations about.
Tom, that's a great question, I think, and I can see two answers to it. One, what you're describing is our qualifications on the word, that it make you feel a certain way, or that it have these qualities that are listed here. And I think that you're right in saying that in expecting any particular quality to be in the word does put some limitation on it, and putting that limitation on it puts a dampener or a closing. It doesn't leave you completely open, which you need to be if you're, as I believe I believe Lisa had said, that you need to be open and courageous. And I think that's the quality that you need to have, and not to expect yourself to be feeling anything in particular. But I think in another sense, there is this expectation that if you are completely open and not putting any qualifications on what the experience will be, but are just open, that you can expect that the word will be there. That's an expectation that I think is appropriate. It doesn't limit the word in any way. It just is an expression of faith that God is loving and merciful and will provide. So I think that expectation is valid. I don't think you can go into worship without having that expectation. That seems like a necessary condition or state for the heart to be in, to be open and courageous. But to have the expectation that the experience will be this particular thing or that particular thing, then that puts limits, and you're imposing your own thoughts on what cannot be imposed upon, but must be just received.
I think what you said, Tom, also just points to how subtly these things work or don't work. We may not say, no, I don't want that. I don't want to hear it. I'm too busy. I mean, sometimes that's the case, but I think my experience is that it's just, maybe it's that lack of openness. I'm closed because I'm preoccupied with my own egoistic needs, and so the rejection isn't no, it's just meh. I can't be bothered. And then I think sometimes that whole death and condemnation part is in a way subtle too. It may take a long time to see the effect of that rejection. It may not be obvious at first, and it certainly may not be attributed to rejection. there's a million other excuses for why things aren't working out in my life, and may be a long, slow process to see what's missing. Do friends feel complete on this question, or any other closing words or opening words?
After I spoke, I remembered reading an article or a chapter by a psychiatrist who is also a spiritual director, whose name I've forgotten, who said that how you can tell the dark night of the soul from depression. One test is the person going through a dark night of the soul would rather remain in it because he or she feels that it's for his good. And the depressed person simply hates being depressed. Something like that, or doesn't see any possible good in it. So if one is going through a period of dryness, but knows in his heart or her heart that that I'll use the pronoun they, that they're welcoming whatever the Lord sees fit to have them experience, they can be at peace, even in the dryness, even in the long waiting and the feeling empty. And I find myself comforting myself with that.
I think in order for that to be, for that to work, one has to have faith. I don't think that someone can be an agnostic or an atheist and have any idea what the dark night of the soul is. I think there needs to be a context of faith for that, for a person to realize that that is a possibility, or that's a likelihood. I think for people in our secular world, that term would not have meaning. And I think that even though they may be similar in their experience, I think that the person who's depressed really wants to be out of the depression, even though it could be, and probably is, the Lord drawing that person to himself through that process.
This one looks closely related. I'll go ahead and read it. Question 6, what hinders union with Christ? Answer, the strong man armed, whom he cometh to dispossess, who doth what he can to blind the eye from seeing the lovely nature of Christ, and to harden the heart against his visits and appearances. Yes, I need some clarity in that second phrase. Is he referring to Christ?
Yes.
Thank you. It feels to me like we talked a good deal about this in the previous question. And I sort of want to rush on to the answer. How can the soul be helped? But I'm wondering if other people see more in 6 that they'd like to comment on.
Well, there's a, Go-
Sorry.
was someone else going to say something? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, is this, I'm reading this several times and trying to fully understand it. Is this prior to the person originally opening the door, and thus the strong arm, the devil, Satan, blinding that person from seeing the loving nature of Christ and hardening the heart against any visits and appearances? Or could this also mean when one is already in a relationship with the Christ and the strong arm comes, thus going back up to the previous one where it was better that we never heard him and be rejected? I'm not fully convinced I understand the answer to question 6.
I think that the strong man armed Satan is hindering union with Christ both before and after we open the door to welcome Christ. Before we open the door, he or it inspires us to think of other things we could do to distract ourselves or make ourselves feel better, or important things on our to-do list that must be tended to first. And after we've opened the door to Christ and the immediate thrill of self-surrender is over, then, let me put on some music. Let me go take a walk out in the beauty of nature and celebrate how wonderful everything is. I mean, the tempter knows all the possible ways to tempt us, to distract us, to give us attractive rabbit holes, as I like to call them, to climb down and explore. When it's clear, it would be clear to us if we stayed focused that Christ, our visitor, wants us to focus on him, not to gratify his vanity, but for our own good. If we're rushing around and unmindful of our guest, who is the holiest, most wonderful guest we ever opened the door to, we lose the benefit. Well, that's just what the devil wants.
I think that the fact that Penington pluralizes both the word visits and appearances at the very end of this answer indicates that it could be before the door is open, but it's definitely referring to after the door is open, because there's more than one visit. It's not initially blocking the door from opening, but it's more than one visit. It's Christ returning to visit repeatedly and appear repeatedly.
Yes, thanks for pointing out the plurals. It just seems like it speaks of our relationship. This is an ongoing relationship. And I think there may be something important in that verb union, or that word union. What hinders union? And we can have experiences and we can have a relationship, but that's a whole other level to be in union.
Well, I think that union occurs when Christ is received. That is the experience. I think chapter 17 in John talks about that they all may be one, I and them and me, that they all may be one. So it's a union that is the intent. I think the next question, do we have time for that? I don't have a clock. Do we have time to do another one?
It's 7:56 my time.
Oh.
So we may have to save it.
I have something more to say about the union with Christ in question 6. I've heard some very highfalutin talk about union with Christ and all the things that might mean, all the exalted experiences that it might point to. But I'm reminded that Paul says to the Corinthians, don't you realize that Christ dwelleth in you? Don't you get it? That you have the life of Christ in you. You are united with him. He is indwelling you and you indwelling him. As if some of us, I want David to have time to say goodbye, but it can be a very simple thing, just a yielding to a presence that's there without any fireworks.
Yeah, thank you for being here, David, and everyone. I'll stop the recording and we can have a few more minutes of quiet.